During a chaotic late-night interview, a usually calm actress suddenly snaps at the host when his jokes cross a line, leaving the studio in shocked silence. Her quiet co-star, known for his composure, finally explodes in anger, delivering a fierce on-air reaction that completely stuns the audience and exposes tension that's been simmering for years. The night everything cracked. If you had been in that studio that night, you would have felt it in your chest before you saw anything wrong. It was the kind of tension that makes people lean forward without even knowing why, like the room itself is waiting for someone to be brave. On this imagined night in New York, the studio of The Tonight Show glowed under 100 hot lights, but behind the brightness, there was a kind of quiet trouble moving between three people who had done this dance 1,000 times. Sandra Bullock sat in her dressing room, staring at her reflection as a makeup artist dusted the last bit of powder from her cheek. She should have felt at home here, on stages, in front of cameras, making millions of strangers laugh. Instead, her hands rested too tightly in her lap, fingers pressing half-moons into her skin. In the corner of the mirror, taped beside the light bulbs, was a small, crumpled letter from a teenage girl she had met 6 months earlier. "Thank you for being kind when the world wasn't," the girl had written. Sandra read that line almost every day. It reminded her why she tried so hard to keep her temper sealed under a layer of jokes and grace. Tonight, that reminder felt fragile. Down the hallway, Jimmy Fallon paced in a small circle, cue cards fanned out in his shaking hands. The hallway walls were lined with blown-up photos of the show's biggest moments, musical impressions, games, stars doubled over in laughter. He usually loved walking past them. They felt like proof that laughter could fix almost anything. But tonight his stomach twisted each time his eyes fell on a card the writers had slid into the script at the last minute. It was a segment he hadn't wanted, a brutally honest game built around old footage and rumors about Sandra's personal life. "It'll break the internet," one producer had said, clapping him on the back. Jimmy had smiled then, but it hadn't reached his eyes. He was a kind man who sometimes let fear of losing the audience talk louder than his own conscience. As the band's warm-up music thumped through the walls, he told himself, "She's tough. She'll laugh. She always laughs." The words didn't comfort him. In the next room, Keanu Reeves sat on a low couch, elbows on his knees, hands loosely clasped. He was dressed in black, as usual, the fabric soft and worn rather than flashy. A half-finished cup of tea cooled on the table in front of him. The noise of the show preparing, footsteps, cables dragging, the distant roar of the crowd, floated through the door, but inside the room there was a gentler stillness. Sandra stepped in without knocking, as she always did with him. For a moment she just leaned her head against the closed door and exhaled. Keanu watched her with quiet concern, the kind that doesn't demand explanation but still invites it. "You ever feel like you're walking into a storm everybody else thinks is just a party?" she asked, trying to turn anxiety into humor. He gave a small half-smile, the kind that carried years of loss and survival behind it. "All the time," he said, "but storms pass. People remember who held the umbrella, not who made the thunder." Her laugh was soft, a little broken. His words weren't poetry to him, just simple truth, but they landed in her like a hand on her shoulder, steadying. They talked for a few minutes about the movie they were promoting, about stunts gone wrong and late-night shoots. But every now and then Sandra's gaze drifted to the monitor on the wall, where the countdown to showtime blinked in red numbers. She hated that she could feel fear over something as small as a talk show segment when she knew how much real pain existed in the world. But that was exactly it. She had met too many people whose stories were turned into jokes. A few weeks earlier, someone on another show had made a casual remark about a tragedy in her life. The audience had laughed because the cue lights told them to. She had smiled through it, gone home, and cried where no one could see. Tonight she had promised herself, "If that line gets crossed again, I'm not going to swallow it." The promise scared her almost as much as the possibility itself. Outside, the show snapped into motion. The band erupted into the opening theme, camera cranes swooped, and the audience leapt to their feet on command. Jimmy stepped through the curtain with his familiar bounce, his smile like a spotlight. To millions watching from their couches, he looked as relaxed as ever. Only the crew who knew him well could see the slight stiffness in his shoulders, the way his eyes flickered once toward the producer's booth where a red folder, the segment folder, waited. He moved through the monologue on autopilot, collecting easy laughs. But every time the crowd roared, a small voice in the back of his mind reminded him, "They'll roar louder in 3 segments." That's what they want. He wasn't sure anymore who they were, the producers, the network, the internet, or the part of himself that feared becoming yesterday's headline. When Sandra finally walked onto the stage, the room lifted. The audience clapped harder than usual, some even stood back up, phones sneaking out for quick, illegal photos. She waved, joked with the band, gave Jimmy a mock curtsy before sitting down. On the surface, it was the same charming dance they'd done for years. He teased her about doing her own stunts. She teased him about still not remembering her coffee order after a decade of interviews. They laughed, they touched each other's arms the way comfortable friends do, and for a while it felt almost easy. But every now and then, when the camera cut away, Sandra's smile collapsed for a heartbeat, and Keanu, waiting for his turn at the side of the stage, saw it. He watched from the wings as a stagehand slid the red folder onto Jimmy's desk during a commercial break. Jimmy's eyes fell on it, and something in his face hardened, not cruelty, but decision. Keanu knew that look. He had seen it on directors who chose spectacle over safety, on executives who chose gossip over dignity. He felt his jaw tighten as Jimmy flipped the folder open, skimmed the cue card, and gave a nervous, automatic chuckle. The band finished a riff, the "We're Back." Light flashed, and millions of screens lit up again. "All right, Sandra," Jimmy said, his voice a notch too bright. "We have a little surprise for you." The audience reacted on instinct, cheering at the word surprise. Sandra's body went very still. On the monitor in front of her, she saw a black screen waiting to play something. Her heart picked up speed, the way it did in the second before a stunt when she didn't know if she was about to hit the mark or the pavement. "Our team dug up some, let's say very revealing footage from a time in your life you probably hoped we'd all forgotten," Jimmy continued. The crowd laughed, leaning in. Somewhere in the dark behind the cameras, a producer gave a satisfied nod. Sandra's mind raced. She thought about all the things that could be: a clumsy early audition, an unflattering red carpet fall. She could handle those. She could laugh at herself. She always had. But then she saw in the corner of the monitor a frozen frame, a hospital corridor she knew too well, captured from a cruel, years-old paparazzi video taken on one of the worst days of her life. Her throat closed. No one had asked permission to use that. No one had warned her. And now, in a matter of seconds, millions of people were about to watch her grief played for laughs. Beside the stage, Keanu stepped forward without meaning to, every muscle in his body tensing. He recognized the corridor too. He knew what that day had cost her. His usual calm thinned to something hot and sharp, his hands curled into fists he didn't plan on using. The kindness that defined him did not mean he lacked limits, and tonight someone was racing toward them at full speed. Jimmy didn't see the monitor. He only saw the cue card and the little red light on the camera telling him they were live. The audience chanted softly, play it," like a game. His fingers hovered over the edge of the desk where the control button waited. In his ear, the producer's voice pushed, "Do it, Jimmy. This is gold." He swallowed, heart pounding loud enough to drown out the band. This was the moment, ratings, viral clips, all of it balanced on a single choice. Sandra reached out and laid her hand on the wooden desk between them, close enough that he could feel the tremor in her fingers. Her voice was low, almost swallowed by the noise of the room, but her eyes were clear and fierce. "Jimmy," she said, "please don't play that." For the first time all night, the laughter died so fast it felt like the air had been sucked out of the studio. The band fell silent. The audience froze, confused. Jimmy stared at her, at the fear and steel mixed in her gaze, at the hand that now seemed to anchor both of them to the ground. His thumb hovered just above the button. On the monitor, the black screen blinked, ready. And before anyone could decide what kind of show this was going to be, a comedy, a spectacle, or something else entirely, the screen flickered, and the first frame of the forbidden video began to appear. When laughter crosses the line, the image pushed through the black like a bruise surfacing, cold hospital tiles, harsh fluorescent light, a stretcher half in frame. For half a second, the studio didn't understand what it was seeing. It just looked like any other clip. But Sandra knew that hallway by the way the light hit the floor. Her stomach dropped so suddenly she felt dizzy, and a sound escaped her throat that wasn't quite a word. She pulled her hand back from Jimmy's desk as if she'd touched fire. Jimmy heard that sound before he really saw the screen. It cut straight through the noise of the cheering crowd and the instructions screaming in his earpiece. He finally glanced at the monitor, and recognition slammed into him. He remembered the tabloid headlines from that year, the loss, the pleading look in Sandra's eyes when she'd asked the press to let her grieve in peace. His thumb, already pressing down on the button to roll the clip, jerked away at the last instant. The image froze on a single frame. Sandra in the distance of the corridor, her face turned away, shoulders caved in, as the video cut to a rigid pause. Silence hit the studio like a wave. For the audience, confusion came first. They weren't used to silence here. Every space was usually filled with jokes or music or applause. Now they stared at the frozen image on the giant screen, then at Sandra, then at Jimmy. The laugh sign above them glowed a desperate red, but nobody abated. Sandra's eyes were locked on the picture, her chest rising and falling too fast. Her carefully built armor of charm and professionalism, the one she wore through every interview, cracked in full view of millions. In the shadows at stage right, Keanu took an involuntary step forward. His hands, often so still, rose slightly as if he might reach for her even across the distance. He felt heat climb up his neck, not the heat of stage lights, but of anger, the slow, steady kind that comes when you watch someone gentle being cornered. A stagehand tried to guide him back, whispering, "We're still rolling, they'll cut to commercial," but his feet wouldn't move. He could feel the weight of all the times he'd stayed quiet, all the times he'd swallowed his own anger to keep the peace. Tonight that habit felt like betrayal. "I'm so sorry," Jimmy started, his voice thin, not the booming late-night host tone everyone knew. "Sandra, He glanced toward the control booth, eyes wide, searching for some sign of rescue, but in his earpiece the producer barked, "Keep going, we can spin this, just make it light." That command, so casual and detached, snapped something inside him. He looked back at Sandra and saw not a guest, not content, but a friend sitting under lights that suddenly felt cruel. His cue cards were still in his hand, filled with pre-written jokes about old scandals and embarrassing footage. The words blurred, useless. Sandra tore her gaze away from the frozen image and turned to him. The audience watched in perfect stillness as she pushed her chair back a few inches, putting deliberate space between herself and the desk. Her voice, when it came, was calm in a way that frightened everyone more than shouting would have. "You were really going to play that?" she asked. Her eyes were shiny but dry, anger burning off the tears before they could fall. "On national television? For a laugh?" Each word landed heavy in the air. Somewhere deep in the crowd, a woman shifted and whispered, "Don't." But no one knew if she meant Jimmy, the producers, or the universe itself. Jimmy opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. I didn't see what it was, they just..." He stopped, hearing his own excuse as he said it. It sounded small and cowardly even to him. He thought of all the times he'd promised himself his show would be a safe place that people would leave feeling better than when they came in. Now he was sitting at the center of something that felt rotten. "You're right," he said, his voice shaking. "This was wrong, I'm sorry." It was honest, but it was late, and the damage of the attempt still hung between them. For Sandra, the apology didn't land yet. Years of keeping quiet, of letting things slide because she didn't want to be difficult, pressed against the back of her teeth. She could almost hear that girl's letter again, "Thank you for being kind when the world wasn't." Kindness, she thought, did not mean letting people turn your worst days into entertainment. Her shoulders straightened. "This isn't about being sensitive," she said, looking not just at Jimmy but into the cameras past them to the people at home. "There are real human beings in that hallway, families, nurses, me, and you are going to roll it like it's a blooper reel." A murmur rippled through the crowd. A few people lowered their phones, suddenly ashamed of having them out. Upstairs in the control room, someone hissed, "Cut to commercial, cut now," and the screen in living rooms across the country began to fade to ads. But in the studio, they were still live for a few more heartbeats, trapped in the delay between decision and execution. Sandra stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor, an ugly sound in the quiet. For once, she didn't smooth the moment over with a joke. "I came here because I thought this was a place where we could talk about the work, maybe share something meaningful," she said, voice trembling with restrained fury. "If my pain is the price of your ratings, I'm not paying it." She stepped away from the couch, away from the desk, from the cameras that kept trying to follow. Keanu was already moving toward her before anyone could call clear. Security hesitated, unsure if this was part of some elaborate bit. Jimmy half rose from his chair, caught between the duty to salvage the show and the urge to stop everything. The band, uncertain, held their instruments in a frozen almost chord. Sandra reached the edge of the stage and paused for the first time, one foot on the step down, shoulders shaking now that adrenaline was crashing. She didn't look back. Behind her, Jimmy said her name once, not as a host calling a guest, but as a friend trying not to lose one. She stopped just long enough for his voice to reach her, then kept walking. The red on-air sign flickered off as the commercial finally cut in, and the audience exhaled all at once, the room breaking into scattered whispers. In the sudden half-darkness of the stage, Keanu caught up to her just as she disappeared behind the curtain, his hand reaching out, his face set in a grim, burning calm. And as the studio erupted into chaotic movement, producers shouting, crew running, Jimmy sinking back into his chair like a man who had just watched something important slip through his fingers. Keanu stepped through the curtain after her with a look that made even the security guard step aside. The anger he had kept buried for years rising with a clarity that would not be gentle when he came back out. The quiet man who finally raised his voice. Backstage, the air felt thicker, as if the studio's bright oxygen hadn't made it past the curtain. Sandra stood with her back against the cool cinder-block wall, arms wrapped around herself like she was holding her ribs together. Her breath came in uneven bursts, years of swallowed emotions fighting their way out all at once. A production assistant hovered a few feet away, torn between comforting her and dragging her back because someone in a headset was screaming that the show needed her. Keanu stepped between them without a word. Gently, he lifted the assistant's headset off with 2 fingers and placed it in her hands, a quiet dismissal. His attention never left Sandra. "Talk to me," he said softly. No cameras, no audience. Just 2 people in a fluorescent hallway, the roar of the crowd muffled now to a distant storm. She shook her head, a short, sharp movement. "I told myself I'd keep it together," she whispered. "Come in, smile, promote the movie, get out, be professional. That's what they want, right? Not the messy human underneath." Her laugh was bitter, ragged. "But then I saw that hallway and it was like they reached inside my chest and just—" She pressed her fist against her sternum as if trying to push something back down. "There were things said to me in that corridor that no one in the world will ever hear, and they almost turned it into a punchline." Keanu listened with the intense stillness of someone who knew better than to fill pain with platitudes. He thought about his own corridors, the hospital rooms he had walked out of alone, the nights when grief felt like a physical weight on his lungs. "You don't owe them your composure," he said finally, "not when they don't offer you their respect." His voice was low but steady, like an anchor in a rising tide. "You were brave to stop it." "Brave," she echoed, eyes flashing. "I just blew up on live television. They're probably already cutting it into memes." She pushed a hand through her hair, pacing a small, frantic circle. "Tomorrow I'll be Sandra Loses It, trending everywhere, the crazy actress who can't take a joke." The fear underneath her anger showed itself then, not for her career, but for the way the world punishes women who draw a line. Maybe I should have just sat there and laughed like they wanted. Keanu stepped into her path, making her stop. "You've spent your whole life making people comfortable," he said. There was no accusation in it, only sadness. "Sometimes kindness looks like a smile. Sometimes it looks like saying enough. If people can't tell the difference, that's not your failure." He hesitated, then added, "And you're not doing this alone, not tonight." Before she could ask what he meant, a stage manager rushed up, eyes wild, clipboard clutched to their chest. "We're back from commercial in 60 seconds, they blurted. "The network is freaking out. Jimmy's asking if you'll come back on just to, smooth it over a little, say it was a misunderstanding." Their gaze flicked nervously between Sandra's tear-bright eyes and Keanu's unreadable expression. "They're also ready to scrap your segment if you refuse, but, they'd really like you not to refuse." Sandra let out a disbelieving breath. "Of course they would." She glanced toward the curtain where the light from the set bled through in a hard, golden strip. Part of her wanted to run, get in a car, go home, pretend this night never happened. Let the machine spin its story without her. But another part, the one that had spoken up on stage, burned hotter now. "If I go back out there and pretend everything's fine, I'm telling every person who's ever had their boundaries crossed that they should just swallow it too," she said quietly. "I can't do that. I won't." The stage manager shifted their weight, gears in their head turning fast. "Okay then, what do you want to do?" It was a rare question in a world that usually told them, not asked them. Keanu looked through the crack in the curtain and saw Jimmy at the desk, hands folded, staring down, his usual playful energy gone. The crowd buzzed, restless, waiting for someone to tell them how to feel about what they'd just seen. The band members whispered to each other, shoulders tight. The whole room felt like a held breath. "I'll go," Keanu said, surprising himself with how certain the words felt as they left his mouth. The stage manager blinked. "You alone?" He nodded. "Bring me out first. Don't script it. Don't put anything on the teleprompter." His eyes met Sandra's. "If they're going to talk about this, let's tell the truth, not the clip version." Under the calm, there was a simmering fury now, not wild but precise, the kind that can cut through steel when aimed right. Sandra searched his face. "You don't have to fix this for me," she said, voice softening around the edges. "It's not your mess." "I'm not trying to fix you," he replied. "I'm trying to fix the part of this that I can touch. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for each other is step into the line of fire together." He paused, a faint, sad smile touching the corner of his mouth. "Besides, I've spent a lot of years being quiet while people turned pain into show business. Maybe it's time I use my inside voice a little louder." The stage manager pressed a finger to their earpiece, listening to someone shouting in their head, then let out a shaky breath. "They'll kill me for this," they muttered, "but okay, we're doing it. Keanu first, then we'll see if Sandra wants to join." They pointed at him. 30 seconds. When I wave, you walk." As they hurried back toward the set, Sandra reached out and caught Keanu's sleeve. Her fingers tightened briefly, gratitude and fear braided together. "Whatever happens out there," she said, "thank you for not looking away." He looked at her hand on his arm, then up into her eyes. "Whatever happens," he answered, "we'll stand in it together." Out on the stage, the band's music swelled back up, thin and forced, as the show returned from commercial. Jimmy straightened in his chair, his eyes ringed with regret and something that looked a lot like resolve. The audience clapped obediently, but their faces were wary now. They had seen behind the curtain of the usual fun. As the applause died, Jimmy leaned into the microphone, took a breath that shook just enough to be heard, and said, "So, a lot just happened." A hush fell over the room. "And I don't want to pretend it didn't." He glanced toward the curtain, catching a glimpse of dark hair and a black suit waiting in the shadows. "My next guest was supposed to come out here and play a silly game," he continued, voice low. "Instead, he asked if he could talk, really talk, and honestly, I think we need that more." He nodded to the band, who dropped the usual fanfare and played a softer, uncertain chord. "Please welcome." The audience turned as the curtain began to move, curiosity and tension twisting together in the air. Keanu stepped into the light, his usual quiet presence wrapped now in a gravity that made even the farthest rows lean forward. He didn't wave or crack a joke. He just walked to the couch, sat down, and looked straight at Jimmy with an intensity that made millions of people at home stop whatever they were doing without knowing why. Jimmy cleared his throat. "You wanted to say something," he offered, handing over the moment. It was the bravest thing he'd done all night, giving up control. Keanu nodded once, then turned, not to Jimmy first, but to the audience, to the cameras, to everyone who had just watched a woman draw a line and be punished for it. "When we laugh," he began, voice calm but edged with steel, "we have to remember who we're laughing at and why, because sometimes, without meaning to, we start laughing at wounds." The room went so still that even the cameras seemed to quiet. Backstage, Sandra stood in the shadow of the curtain, listening to every word, her heart thudding hard against her ribs. And just as Keanu drew breath to say the thing he had carried for years, the story that would turn his anger into something bigger than himself. A red light on top of the main camera began to blink, and a frantic voice shouted from the control room, "Cut his mic if he goes off script."